The streetlights buzzed above her, casting a cold amber glow on the concrete beneath her feet. It was late. Too late for most things, except despair. She stood at the edge of the bridge, hands gripping the cold iron railing, looking down at the water that churned silently below. The wind was gentle but unkind, lifting strands of her hair like fingers brushing away what was left of resistance. She didn't cry. Not anymore. The tears had dried up weeks ago, maybe months, maybe years. She whispered into the wind, not sure if anyone or anything would hear. God, if you're there, why haven't you said anything? No answer. Just the sound of cars in the distance, the hum of city life too far to notice one more broken girl. In her pocket was a folded note, 4 lines long, written in trembling hands. It didn't explain everything. It didn't have to. She believed no one really wanted to understand anymore. That's what happens when you feel invisible long enough. You begin to believe you are. But she hadn't always felt this way. There was a time, years ago, when she believed in things, in people, in goodness, and most of all, in God. She remembered a church pew small enough for her feet to dangle, a Sunday school teacher who told her, Jesus knows your name. She believed it. She believed it deeply. She would whisper to Jesus every night, not because she was told to, but because she felt him close. Like a friend who sat by her bedside, even when the lights were off and the room grew quiet. She remembered the first time she prayed for someone else. It was for her mother, who had cried quietly in the kitchen after losing her job. She had knelt on her rug and said, Dear Jesus, help Mama be happy again. The next morning, her mom smiled at breakfast, and in her small heart, she thought, Jesus listens. But that was a long time ago, before things got complicated, before prayers became questions, before silence. She leaned a little farther over the edge. The wind bit sharper now, but she welcomed it. In the city below, lights blinked in office buildings, lives moving forward. Somewhere, someone was celebrating a birthday. Somewhere, someone was falling in love. And somewhere else, a mother was whispering to her child, Don't worry, God is watching over you. She almost smiled at that thought. Almost. Then a memory came, uninvited. She was 15, sitting alone at a youth campfire. The speaker had asked, What would your life look like if you gave it completely to God? Her heart had raced. Her hands trembled. And something inside her had whispered, Say yes. That night, she'd written in her journal, God, I'm yours. She had meant it, with everything she had. But somewhere between then and now, life had pulled her apart. A boy she trusted too much. A mistake that wouldn't go away. A shame too heavy to carry. A silence too long to survive. And worst of all, the feeling that God, the very one who said he'd never leave, had turned away. She stared down at the water. Would it hurt? Would anyone know? Would it matter? She whispered again. Not because she believed anymore, but because, somehow, part of her still remembered how. Jesus, if you're still there, I can't do this alone, but I don't know how to come back. And then a sound, a distant chime, soft, hollow. It rang once, then again. She turned her head slightly. Far off, across rooftops and shadows, a steeple stood silhouetted against the night sky. And the bell was ringing, not for a funeral, not for a wedding, just Ringing, she closed her eyes. Her breath caught. And deep, buried in the folds of her memory, a voice, her own from long ago, returned. Jesus, thank you for loving me. The same voice she had once spoken in innocence, in joy, in faith. Something cracked inside her, not loudly, not dramatically, but something shifted, not enough to make her step away. Not yet, but enough to make her stand still. Before everything fell apart, before pain had a name and guilt had a face, there was a girl with messy hair and wide eyes who believed that Jesus lived in the sunlight. She had grown up in a small town where the church bell rang every Sunday like clockwork. The steeple always seemed taller than any other building, as if pointing the way to heaven. As a child, she loved that sound. It meant songs and stories. It meant hugs from old ladies with gentle eyes and pockets full of peppermint. Her parents were strict but kind. Faith was woven into every corner of life. Grace at meals, morning devotions. Kin than mo tren ban hu, mot vat song thieng lieng. And she loved Jesus, not because she was told to, but because she felt him. She remembered lying in bed at night, pulling the covers up to her chin, and whispering prayers like secrets. Dear Jesus, thank you for today. Please help Daddy not be so tired. And please, don't let Mom cry again. I love you. She would close her eyes, and for a moment, everything felt okay. One night, after a particularly bad storm, she had woken up crying. The thunder had shaken the house and her little heart. She remembered her mother rushing in, holding her tightly and whispering, "Don't be afraid. Jesus is bigger than the storm." And just like that, peace returned. That phrase stuck with her. Jesus is bigger than the storm. She wrote it once on a sticky note and placed it on her mirror. It stayed there for years, until the ink faded and the glue dried. At church, she loved Bible stories, the kind with brave endings and miracles. Daniel in the lion's den, David and Goliath, the bleeding woman who touched Jesus' robe and was instantly healed. Her favorite was the story where Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me." Matthew 19:14. She believed he really meant it. She was sure that if he ever passed through her town, he would smile at her, maybe even sit by her on the swing and tell her that he had plans for her life. Beautiful plans, hopeful plans. She dreamed about becoming a missionary, traveling to far-off places and telling other children about Jesus. Her journal was filled with prayers, dreams, and verses copied in neat handwriting. Jeremiah 29:11 appeared more than once. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." Hope, future, promise, words that once felt warm like sunlight on her skin. But as she grew, so did the weight of the world. The stories became lessons. The magic became theology. The wonder turned into expectations. She still prayed, but not as freely. She still believed, but not as wildly. And when life began to disappoint her, when people didn't act like the Jesus she loved, her heart began to hide. There were moments she wanted to ask questions, but didn't dare. Moments when she didn't feel heard. Moments when church felt more like performance than presence. And yet, through all the changes, through all the slow drifting, those childhood seeds of faith remained, buried deep, hidden in shadow, waiting for light. Because real faith, the kind born in purity and love, doesn't die easily. It might grow quiet. It might even go dormant. But under the right conditions, it returns, stronger, deeper, wiser. And on that bridge, with the bell ringing faintly in the background and the tears she had long since buried starting to rise again, something stirred. Not a miracle, not a voice, but a memory of a little girl whispering into the night, "Jesus, thank you for loving me." That memory was a thread. And sometimes all you need to begin healing is one thread. Faith doesn't always shatter in one loud crash. Sometimes it crumbles quietly, like pages curling in fire, like walls softening with water, like hope fading without notice. It started with disappointment, nothing big, nothing dramatic, just a slow accumulation of little heartbreaks, a friend's betrayal, a teacher's silence, a prayer left unanswered, a question met with, "Just have more faith." She was 17 when her first love promised forever and left after spring. She didn't blame God at first. She just blamed herself. She told no one. Not when she cried herself to sleep. Not when she stopped singing in church. Not when she started wearing her mask. The smile that said, "I'm fine," when nothing was. Later that same year, she made a mistake. She thought it was love. She thought it was redemption. It ended with shame and silence, and a secret she could not undo. The test turned positive, and her world tilted off its axis. She prayed, harder than she ever had. She begged God for clarity, for rescue, for a miracle. None came. Her parents, devout and proud, couldn't look at her. The pastor's wife avoided her. Her old youth group friends whispered behind her back. Every pew that once felt like sanctuary now echoed with judgment. One Sunday, she walked into church and felt the air freeze around her. And for the first time in her life, she wondered, does God feel this cold too? She stopped praying. Not because she didn't want to believe, but because she didn't know how to speak to a God she thought might be ashamed of her. The abortion clinic was quiet, clean, efficient, emotionless. She didn't cry during the procedure. She didn't cry afterward either. It wasn't until weeks later, when she passed a child's shoe in a store window, that the numbness cracked. She ran out of the store and vomited on the sidewalk. Still, she told no one. Her parents thought she had a stomach virus. Her friends assumed she was grieving a breakup. No one knew she was grieving a version of herself she could never go back to. And God? She assumed he had turned his face away. She tried to rebuild her life, tried to pretend. New city, new school, new friends who didn't know her story, new patterns of self-destruction. She told herself, this is freedom. But it felt more like floating through fog, like being alive, but untethered. The nights grew longer. Sleep came in fragments. When she prayed, if she prayed, it was short, sarcastic. Still not listening, huh? And yet, even in her bitterness, a small ache remained. Not for religion, not for rules, but for Jesus, the one she used to whisper to, the one she once believed would sit beside her swing. She missed him, but she didn't believe he missed her, so she drifted. And the world kept breaking her, until all that remained was a version of herself she barely recognized. A girl with tired eyes, a heavy soul, and a heart that didn't know how to hope anymore. There is a silence that comes after grief, and then there is a silence that comes after guilt. The first one aches, the second one eats. She lived in that second kind, The months after the clinic blurred together. Work, bed, screens, noise, nothing. She let messages pile up, missed birthdays, skipped holidays. She stopped answering calls, even from people who still loved her, especially from them, because love felt like something she didn't deserve anymore. She moved into a small apartment above a liquor store. The light in the hallway flickered constantly. The water in the bathroom sink never ran clear. She didn't mind. She thought she deserved worse. Her days were filled with routine, just enough to avoid stillness. But nights were the enemy. At night, everything returned. The memories, the whispers, the regret, the child's shoe in the window, the face of her mother when she found out, the silence of her last prayer. Sometimes she lay on the floor, curled into herself, whispering to no one, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Like a mantra, like a punishment. She began to believe in patterns. If she felt pain long enough, maybe it would cancel out the wrong. If she stayed alone, maybe no one else would get hurt. If she disappeared, maybe the world would breathe easier. She stopped going outside, stopped brushing her hair, stopped looking in mirrors. They only reminded her of the girl she used to be. Food became optional. Sleep became escape. Hope became absurd. And God? She didn't even hate him anymore. That would require too much belief. Instead, she tucked him into the same place she kept childhood drawings, a relic from a life no longer hers. But pain has a way of demanding attention, and eventually, silence cracks. She remembered one particular night. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that drowns out thought. She had reached for her old Bible, buried beneath a stack of unopened mail. She hadn't opened it in years. The pages were stiff, the cover faded. She opened to a random place. Her eyes landed on Psalm 88. It read, "I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Darkness is my closest friend." She closed the book quickly. Was that even allowed in the Bible? She had expected comfort. Instead, she found a mirror. And strangely, something in her chest loosened. Not joy, not peace, but recognition. Someone, somewhere, had written that psalm. Someone who had felt what she felt. Someone whose pain was sacred enough to be scripture. That night, for the first time in months, she cried. Not from guilt, but from grief. She mourned the version of herself that still believed. She mourned the loss of innocence, of purpose, of light. And maybe, just maybe, she mourned the silence of God. But even in her tears, she didn't pray. Not yet. She didn't think he would answer. She didn't think she had the right. So instead, she whispered into the void, "If you're still real, you know where to find me." And he did, but not in the way she expected. She didn't plan the night she almost jumped. It wasn't dramatic. There was no final letter, no tears, no cinematic farewell, just exhaustion and quiet and a kind of numbness so complete it felt peaceful. She walked to the bridge without music, no phone in her hand, no thoughts in her mind, just a stillness she hadn't known in months. Sometimes despair disguises itself as peace. It lulls you into silence, convinces you that the world would be better without you. It whispers, "No one will notice. No one will blame you. God already gave up." And in that moment, she believed it. She stepped over the outer railing slowly. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. There was no fear left, only release. The water below shimmered black, reflecting faint lights from the city beyond. And then it happened. A sound, not a voice, not thunder, not some grand sign from heaven, just a bell, one long, hollow chime, then another, and another. At first, she ignored it. Random noise, city clutter, coincidence, but it kept ringing. 3, 4, 5 times. It wasn't the hour. It wasn't a call to service. It was a church bell. Old, rusted, too far to be that loud. And yet, somehow, clear. Her body froze. The sound pulled her backward, not physically, but emotionally. Like a string tugging at a buried part of her she had forgotten existed. She saw herself again, a little girl in a white dress, holding her mother's hand, walking into a church where that same bell once rang. Jesus loves me, this I know. The song echoed faintly in her memory. For the first time in months, her breath caught. Something cracked inside her, not with pain, but with memory. The voice of her Sunday school teacher returned. Jesus never stops knocking, even if you stop answering. Her grip loosened on the railing. Tears formed, real ones, not from guilt or shame, but from something deeper. Something like longing. She stepped back, just one foot, then the other. She collapsed onto the concrete, knees hitting hard, arms shaking. The bell continued, softer now, like a heartbeat. She pressed her palms together, not out of habit, not out of certainty, but out of desperation. She whispered, not loudly, not eloquently, but truthfully, God, if you're still there, I can't do this anymore, but I don't know how to come back. There was no light from the sky. No angel appeared. No warm wind wrapped around her, just silence, and her breath, and the echo of her own voice, finally reaching heaven again. But sometimes, silence isn't absence. Sometimes it's waiting, and something in her spirit knew. That whisper had been heard. She stood slowly. Her knees ached. Her clothes were damp, but she felt lighter, not healed, not whole, but interrupted. And that was enough. Enough to go home. Enough to survive one more night. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to find out. She didn't go back to church the next day, or the next week. Healing doesn't move in straight lines, but something had shifted. The old Bible, still cracked, still worn, no longer felt like a stranger. She opened it again, carefully this time. Not looking for answers, but for presence. She started in Psalms, the prayers of people who cried out in confusion, grief, even anger. Why have you forsaken me? How long, O Lord? Restore to me the joy of your salvation. She underlined that last one. It felt like hers. A few days later, an unexpected message arrived. It was from a woman she hadn't spoken to in years. A leader from her old youth group. Hey, the message read, I don't know if this is weird, but I was praying this morning and your name came to my heart. You okay? She stared at it for a long time, then typed, no, but thank you. They talked, slowly at first, and then more often. The woman invited her to a small women's group, No pressure, she said. Just tea, prayer, and some honesty. She didn't want to go, but something in her said, try. That Thursday, she sat in a circle with 5 other women. None of them asked about her past. None of them needed her to be whole. They just saw her, and that was new. One of them read from Isaiah 43, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned." She felt tears behind her eyes, not from guilt, but from comfort. They asked if she wanted to share. She shook her head. Not yet. But she came back. The week after that, and the next. The third week, someone said something she never forgot. Healing doesn't mean going back to who you were. It means letting God build something new out of what was broken. That night, she went home and knelt beside her bed. Like the little girl she used to be, she didn't know what to say. She didn't even know if she believed fully yet. But she whispered again, "Jesus, I miss you." The silence felt different this time. Not empty, just quiet. Like someone listening. She began to journal again. Not sermons, not theology, just prayers, simple ones. Thank you for today. I'm scared. Help me not hate myself. Stay close. She started walking again. Just short walks. Just long enough to notice trees, birds, clouds. The world hadn't changed, but her eyes had. She passed a playground one morning. Children laughed. One girl with pigtails yelled to her friend, "Jesus still loves you even if you're bad." She laughed out loud. Not at the theology, but at the reminder. And maybe, just maybe, she began to believe it again. Not perfectly, not always, but honestly. And that's where healing lives. Healing is not linear. Some days, she woke up filled with light, whispering praise songs under her breath. Other days, she stayed in bed past noon, wrapped in doubt like a blanket. And that was okay, because now she understood. Grace wasn't a reward for consistency. It was the gift for those who kept showing up. But there was one thing she still couldn't do: forgive herself. She would sit in church, hands lifted, tears falling as the worship leader sang, "Chains fall, fear bow. Here now, Jesus, you change everything." And still she held back. She believed in God. She believed He could forgive. She even believed He had forgiven her. But she didn't believe she deserved it. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw a girl who had failed, a girl who had taken a life, a girl who ran, a girl who broke promises to herself, to her parents, to God. So she kept her head down. She served behind the scenes. She helped others. But secretly, she thought, this is all I'm good for now. Background faith, quiet repentance. Until one Thursday evening, something changed. The women's group was studying John 8, the story of the woman caught in adultery. She had read it before, many times. But that night, it was different. They read slowly, verse by verse. The Pharisees bring the woman forward, caught, ashamed, publicly humiliated. They ask Jesus, shouldn't she be stoned? And Jesus? He bends down, writes in the dirt. Then he stands and says, let the one without sin cast the first stone. One by one, they walk away, until only he and the woman remain. Then Jesus says, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. John 8:11. Those words pierced her. Neither do I condemn you. She read them again, and again, and again. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she let those words fall. Not on the woman in the Bible, but on herself. She whispered, Jesus, is that for me too? And in the silence that followed, she felt it. Not a voice, not a sign, but a knowing. Yes, it was for her too. She wept. She fell to her knees in the living room, hands open, heart broken wide, and she said it aloud. I forgive myself. It didn't erase the past. It didn't make everything okay, but it broke a chain she'd worn for years, and in the days that followed, she began to see herself differently. Not as a failure, not as damaged, but as a daughter who had been found, a daughter whom Jesus had waited for. She started to speak again, not just with God, but with people. She called her parents. She told them everything. They cried. They apologized too. Healing flowed in every direction. She shared her story at a women's retreat. One woman came up afterward, tears in her eyes, and whispered, Thank you. I thought I was the only one. And that's when she realized her pain wasn't wasted. Her past wasn't trash. It was seed. And God had always planned to make it bloom. Her identity was no longer the girl who broke. It was the one Jesus restored. It started with a message in a private group. A simple post. Has anyone ever felt like they were too broken for church? Too far for God? She hesitated for a long time. Then typed, I have. But he came for me anyway. The responses poured in. Hearts, tears, messages like, Can we talk? Your words saved me today. I thought I was alone. She hadn't expected that. She had only told the truth, not with a microphone, not on a stage, just from a place of scars. But that truth carried weight, and she began to realize this is what testimony means. Not perfection, not spiritual eloquence, just honesty, just the story of how Jesus didn't let her die on that bridge. The first time she shared publicly, it was at a small church gathering. Her hands trembled. Her voice broke halfway through, but she didn't stop. She told them about the girl on the railing, about the bell, about the whispered prayer, about the silence that turned out to be presence. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then someone in the back, a teenager, stood up and said, I was going to kill myself this weekend, but maybe I won't. She cried the whole way home, not because she was proud, but because she finally understood redemption isn't just for you. It's for everyone your story will touch. From there, the doors opened. She was asked to speak at schools, recovery centers, online summits, not as a professional, not as a perfect example, but as someone real, someone who had bled and been held. Her favorite moment happened in a quiet chapel. After sharing, a woman in her 50s came up, clutching her hand. She whispered, I aborted my child 30 years ago. I've never told anyone until now. They cried together, and she said again, Jesus still loves you, still wants you, still calls you daughter. That line became her anthem. She printed it on bookmarks. She painted it on canvases. She wrote it in every journal she gave away. Still loved, still wanted, still his. The darkness never disappeared completely. Some nights were still hard, but now she had tools. Scripture, worship, community. prayer. Most of all, she had remembrance, a daily practice of looking back, not to shame, but to remember how far grace had carried her. She wrote a line in her journal one morning that said, "I didn't jump because Jesus didn't let go." That sentence became the title of her testimony series, and thousands listened. Some commented with thanks, some with their own stories, some with anger. But she didn't stop, because for every harsh voice, there were 100 whispers saying, "Me too." Now, when she walks by bridges, she doesn't look down. She looks around. She watches for others, the quiet ones, the ones with tired eyes, the ones who stay until the world goes home. Because she knows now, there are many ledges. Not all of them have railings. Not all of them hang over water. Some are in bedrooms. Some are behind smiles. Some are sitting in the last pew at church, hoping no one sees them shake. She began to write letters, dozens of them. Each one began the same way. To the one standing on the edge, "I've been there." She left them in hospital lobbies, tucked them into Bibles in thrift stores, slipped them into bathroom stalls in women's shelters. Some were never found. Some were never read. But a few, a precious few, made it into the right hands. One letter ended up in a college dorm. The girl who read it messaged her weeks later, "I was going to leave this world that night. Instead, I read your words, and I stayed." That's when she knew this calling wasn't about saving lives. It was about saying what needed to be said before it was too late. So now she speaks directly to them, to you. If you're listening, if you've made it this far, this isn't just her story, it's yours too. Because somewhere deep inside, you've asked the same questions. Where are you, God? Why didn't you stop it? Why do I still hurt? Is it too late for me? And this is her answer. No, it's not too late. Not for you. Not for anyone. Because the same God who found her on a bridge in the cold with nothing left, that same God is near you now. Not angry, not disappointed, just near and waiting for you to say, "If you're still there, help me." It doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It just has to be real. Because he's not looking for perfect. He's looking for honest. And if you've made it this far, maybe that's enough proof that somewhere inside, you still want to live. You still want to heal. You still believe that maybe, just maybe, Jesus is still knocking. He is. And he won't stop. Not until the one on the ledge comes home. You. Yes, you. The one still watching. Maybe you didn't think this story would touch you. Maybe you clicked by accident. Maybe you don't even believe in God. But something held you here. Some thread pulled you through each word, each scene, each breath. That thread might just be him. Because Jesus isn't afraid of your edge. He's not intimidated by your questions. He doesn't flinch at your pain. He walks straight into it. He sits beside you in your darkness, before you believe, before you change, before you get it right. He says, "I'm here. I've never left. You still matter." Maybe no one's ever told you this, so hear it now. You are not a mistake. You are not too far gone. You are not unworthy of love. You are seen. You are known. You are wanted. The woman in this story is real. She stood on a ledge. She almost gave up. And now she's giving back. Not because she's strong, but because grace held her. And that same grace is reaching for you. If you're struggling, if your thoughts are dark, please talk to someone. Call a friend. Message someone you trust. Don't hide. If you don't know how to pray, Just say this: Jesus, I don't know if you're real, but if you are, show me. I want to believe again. That's it. That's enough. You don't need fancy words, just a willing heart. And if you said that, welcome home. Now take a breath. Feel it? That's hope. Hope doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just whispers, keep going, and so you will. One day at a time, one step at a time, one thread of grace at a time. Because the edge is not the end, not when Jesus is still calling. And he is, even now. Healing doesn't mean life gets easy. It just means you're no longer doing it alone. She discovered this truth slowly. After the testimonies, after the tears, after the worship songs faded, came something she hadn't expected. Ordinary days. Days where nothing grand happened. No visions, no emotional highs, just laundry, emails, dishes in the sink, bills in the mailbox. For a while, she feared she had lost something, that maybe the closeness of God was only for the desperate, only for the edge. But she was wrong, because it was in the stillness, in the making of coffee, the folding of clothes, the daily walk past the same corner store, that she began to feel something she never had before. Peace. Not the loud kind, not the choir hallelujah kind, the quiet kind, the kind that settled into her bones and whispered, you are safe now. She learned to live with the past. It no longer chased her. It walked beside her, a reminder, not a master. Some days, she would pass a park and see a child running and feel a small ache. Not guilt, not regret, just memory. And she would place her hand over her heart and whisper, Jesus, hold what I can't. She didn't need to pretend anymore. Not with herself, not with God. If the morning was hard, she said so. If the prayer felt dry, she told him. If the worship song triggered pain instead of joy, she sat in silence and let him understand without words. And he did. She began to learn a new language. Trust in the slow process. Faith didn't always look like revival. Sometimes it looked like brushing her teeth, even when she didn't feel like it. Sometimes it looked like eating breakfast instead of skipping out of punishment. Sometimes it looked like texting a friend, even when her shame told her not to. And sometimes it looked like laughter, deep, belly laughter over a shared joke, a dog doing something ridiculous, or a moment when sunlight hit the window just right. That's when she knew she wasn't surviving anymore. She was living, not like before, not like the world wanted, but fully, as one who had died and been made new. She started painting again. The colors were brighter, the lines less harsh. She no longer needed to create from pain. Now, she created from presence. The Holy Spirit didn't just visit during church services. He lingered in the rhythm of her days. She felt him when she journaled. She heard him in the laughter of a friend. She saw him in the kindness of a stranger. He wasn't just the God of salvation. He was the God of routine, the God of washing hands, of opening blinds, of making soup. She stopped looking for dramatic signs. She began to rest in quiet nearness. And in doing so, she stepped into a new kind of strength, not the strength to fight, but the strength to stay grounded, to stay connected, to stay faithful. One morning, while sipping tea on her porch, she smiled and whispered, so this is what resurrection feels like. And somewhere, in the invisible realm, he smiled too. Healing isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of a new battleground. The enemy doesn't retreat when you find peace. He simply changes his strategy. She began to notice it in small ways, not in obvious temptations, but in whispers. Whispers like, "Who do you think you are to lead others? You're still broken, just better at hiding it. What if this joy doesn't last?" Some days, those whispers grew louder than truth, especially on days she felt tired or lonely, or when prayers went unanswered longer than expected. That's when a new layer of faith had to form. Faith not in the feeling, but in the foundation. She remembered a line from a sermon she once heard. Real faith isn't proven in worship, it's proven in wilderness. And so, the wilderness came, not with fire and fury, but with delays, disappointments, doors that didn't open, dreams that seemed to stall. She applied for a job she believed God had led her to, only to be rejected. She prayed for a friend battling cancer, only to bury her 6 months later. She started a Bible study that dwindled from 10 people to 2. It hurt, not because her faith was gone, but because she had finally let herself hope again. And hope, when tested, is tender. But she didn't run this time. She didn't quit. She didn't isolate. She didn't climb back onto the edge. She stayed. She cried in God's presence. She journaled honestly. She told him she didn't understand. And still, she worshiped. Not because she always felt like it, but because he was still worthy. There was a moment, late one night, when she sat in her car, parked outside the grocery store, head on the steering wheel. She had just received news that someone she trusted had betrayed her trust. Again, the pain felt familiar, too familiar, and in that moment, the temptation returned. Run, isolate, shut down. But instead, she whispered, "Jesus, I want to disappear, but I know you won't let me. So help me stay." And he did. She went home. She called a friend. She told the truth. And the next morning, she got up and read Psalm 27. "I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." She wrote it on a sticky note and put it on her mirror. That became her weapon. Not logic, not clarity, just the promise of goodness here, not just in heaven. Over time, she learned to measure spiritual maturity not by how loud she prayed, but by how well she endured. Faith became less about fixing and more about trusting when nothing felt fixed. She stopped chasing perfection. She started pursuing presence. And when the storms came, and they did, she stood, sometimes trembling, sometimes tearful, but always standing, because she now knew faith isn't the absence of doubt. It's choosing God even in the middle of it. And in that choice, she grew. Not taller, but deeper. Roots sunk low so that no storm could rip her out again. It started small. A text from a young woman. "Can we talk?" Then another. "I saw your video. I've been where you were." She didn't feel ready, didn't feel qualified, but she remembered a quote. "God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called." So she replied, and they talked. One conversation became 2. 2 became 10. 10 became a weekly gathering, not a formal ministry, not with bulletins or microphones, just a living room, a pot of tea, and hearts learning how to beat again. She called it the Edge Collective, a space for women who had almost given up, but hadn't. They sat in circles, not rows, shared stories, not sermons, prayed with honesty, not pretense. There were no masks, no performances, only presence. One night, a woman who had never spoken finally whispered, "I've never believed God could use someone like me, but maybe he can." They cried together, not from sadness, from recognition. She had become what she once needed, a witness that healing was possible. The beauty of her brokenness was that it gave others permission to stop hiding theirs. She didn't preach from stages, but she laid hands on women in kitchens, whispered scripture over souls in coffee shops, held the hands of the trembling without rushing their story. She kept a notebook full of names, each one someone she prayed for, not because she had the answers, but because she knew the weight of being unanswered. She started volunteering at a crisis hotline, not as an expert, as a survivor. Some nights, she stayed up until 2 a.m., listening to strangers cry in the dark. And her answer was always the same: "You're not alone. You're not the only one who has felt this. And this isn't the end of your story." She told them the truth, the raw, quiet truth, that God meets people, not just in cathedrals, but in ER rooms, in shelters, in jail cells, in suicide prevention wards, because he's not afraid of the edge. He stands there too, waiting, listening, calling people home. One day, a girl from the group gave her a small gift, a bracelet. It said, "You helped me choose life." She wept holding it, not because she felt powerful, but because she remembered. She once needed those words too. Now, every time she slips that bracelet on, she whispers, "Lord, use me again." She doesn't need applause. She doesn't chase numbers. She chases hearts. And in serving, she found something she hadn't expected: joy. Not the kind you post, the kind that lives deep, quiet, resilient, holy. She used to think God only moved in big moments, miracles, tears, altar calls. Now she knows better. Now she sees him in the steam rising from her tea mug, in the soft creak of her floorboards, in the laugh of the neighbor's kid, in the way her dog leans against her when she's sad. She sees him when she finds a parking spot on a rainy day, when a song comes on at the exact right time, when a stranger holds the door with a smile. She used to wait for Sunday to feel close to God. Now, she meets him on Tuesdays, at the sink, washing dishes, humming hymns she didn't even know she remembered. She prays in the grocery store, under her breath, over hurting people she sees but will never meet. She doesn't need perfect silence anymore. She can hear him through the noise, because now she understands. God doesn't dwell in the dramatic. He dwells in the daily. When she drives to work, she thanks him for the sky. When she's folding laundry, she prays for the people who will wear the clothes. When she cooks, she thanks him for provision, for spices, for warmth. Faith has become her rhythm, not her performance. And joy? It's no longer elusive. It lives in the small things: the first sip of morning coffee, the stillness of a night without fear, the feeling of waking up and not dreading the day. She has bad days. Of course she does. But now, they don't define her. They remind her to lean in, not pull away. She journals less often, but more deeply. Sometimes the page just says, "Today was normal, thank you," and that's enough. One evening, while watching the sun set from her back steps, she felt it again. That gentle awareness, that warm presence, and she whispered, "You're here, even now." She didn't need proof. She didn't need a voice from heaven. She knew. The same God who pulled her back from the edge walked with her through every mundane hour since. And now, her life was no longer a recovery. It was a testament. not because of where she'd been, but because of where she walked now, step by step, day by day, grace upon grace, still healing, still growing, still held.